While Cheyenne Bottoms is a natural wetland, historically it was dry maybe 2 out of every 5 years. In the book Cheyenne Bottoms, A Wetland in Jeopardy, written in 1990 by John Zimmerman, he writes that wetlands lose large amounts of water through evaporation and through plant leaves, a process called transpiration. Cheyenne Bottoms loses about 60 inches of water to evaporation annually. Only about 24 inches of rain falls here each year. Zimmerman goes on to talk about how crucial this area is to our bird species. Cheyenne Bottoms has documented over 350 species of birds and 41 shorebird species. April 1989, the bottoms was dry. As the water disappeared, so did the birds. A Colorado State University professor had begun a study of fat levels in the shorebirds using the bottoms that spring, and he was able to document the impact of this failure of habitat for the birds. His work revealed that the birds' truncated stay contributed to their leaving with lower than normal fat levels. This meant that they would be able to migrate a shorter than usual distance, perhaps only hundreds of miles instead of over 1,000, before stopping again to replenish energy stores. Thus, the timing of their migratory journey could be extended, which might lead to their missing the short window of suitability of habitat on their Arctic nesting grounds, preventing reproduction that year. Even if they got there on time, their lowered nutritional state might preempt any breeding activity. In the 1990s, work was completed in the Cheyenne Bottoms wildlife area that contributed to ensuring the bottoms would be able to store water to keep it from going dry.
I'm Carl Grover. I was the manager of Cheyenne Bottoms from 1986 through 2017. And it was quite a challenging project, but quite rewarding at the same time. To give you a little bit of background information, the thought process to purchase the property began in the late 1930s. In 1937, the federal government passed legislation which put an excise tax on sporting arms and ammunition, and that excise tax that they collected was redistributed out to the various states for wildlife conservation. One of the first projects that Kansas came up with to use this newfound money was the development of Cheyenne Bottoms. They started acquiring the ground, and the reason they chose the bottoms for the expenditure of these funds was because it was a natural marsh used for eons by migrating wildlife. It would go dry naturally just 2 out of every 5 or 6 years. And since hunters were the principal users at that time, they wanted to develop it so that they would eliminate, or at least minimize, those dry years, so that it would be more of an annual destination for waterfowl hunters. And so that's what started them into the process of constructing the inlet canal and subdividing the basin into different pools. That inlet canal allows the manager to divert water from Wet Walnut Creek and the Arkansas River and bring it into the Bottoms Basin. That water then would be stored in in one of the pools during the course of the summer, and then used to reflood the surrounding pools in the fall. The original construction centered on pool 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 down here. This central pool was what was used for storage, and you could store water into that pool to a depth of about 4 feet. Now, to come up with these pools, they had to construct a lot of dikes, which entailed a lot of work and a lot of money. But once that water got stored in here, in the spring after the rains, when it was most abundant, it could be used then to reflood 1, 2, 3, or maybe even 5 of these surrounding pools in the fall for waterfowl hunting. So that meant that in those years where water was less abundant, what little they could store may not be able to flood these huge pools. And they were just so huge that it would take so much water to make some decent habitat that many years they didn't have enough water to do it. So that led to the modification of the original design in the 1990s. And they went in and subdivided two of these pools, of the hunting pools, with new dikes. So now pool 3 used to be this big, now it's 3A and 3B. And pool 4 was cut so that we have 4A and 4B. And then in pool 1, the storage pool, it was subdivided into 3 smaller pools. And the thought process being that they could still bring in water just like they've always done. They would then extend the inlet canal so that pool 1A became the principal storage pool. They raised the dike, so now instead of a 4 feet depth, they could store water up to 6 feet deep. The reason they wanted to subdivide this pool is to reduce the surface area, which decreases evaporative loss. If you can envision 2 dog bowls of water, one a big surface area and real shallow, and right next to it is one with a small surface area but deeper, and they each have the same amount of water, and you put them outside. By the end of the day, the one with the big surface area is probably going to be dry, and the one with the smaller surface area but the greater depth will still have some water in it, just because it's less surface area to evaporate from. So that was the thought process behind subdividing these pools. One of the other projects that was part of the renovation in the 90s was the construction of blind islands, what we call blind islands. And when you drive through the bottoms, you'll see out in the pools some pretty good sized islands, and they ranged anywhere from 1 acre to up to 3 acres. And the reason that we constructed those was that with the inlet system that has been in place since the 50s, all the way up to the present day, whenever we bring in water from outside the basin and put it into the bottoms, we are bringing in with that water tons of silt or dirt. And so the bottoms is filling in a lot faster now than it would have naturally and had we not done any development at all. And so we had to come up with a way to deal with this increased silt to try and maintain the water depth. And so it's expensive to haul silt off. There is no such thing as cheap dirt like you hear about. So what we ended up doing was consolidating it and just building islands to try and get it out of the system. And we located those islands in areas of very dense cattail stands, because cattail is another sign of an aging marsh. As its marsh starts to fill in, it becomes easier for emergent plants like cattail to become established, and pretty soon that turns into just a wet meadow, and you've lost the wetland altogether. But as a marsh manager, and you're trying to maintain waterfowl habitat, you want to keep this marsh as young as you possibly can. So that means removing silt if it gets too deep, and getting rid of that emergent vegetation. And so the islands did a couple of things. It consolidated the silt, opened up an opening in the dense cattail stands, and at the same time provided a place for birds to nest and also places for hunters to hunt. Most of the work that I've been talking about was originally meant to encourage hunting and provide hunting opportunity. There's a lot of side benefits that go with it. Bird watching in recent years has really become very popular nationwide, and people spend a lot of their vacations just driving the country, the nation, and in many cases the world, going out and just looking for different kinds of birds. And we're seeing a big influx in bird watching into the basin. There's also a good opportunity out here for wetlands research. And the Wetlands Education Center was established with that in mind, to encourage students to come out here and contribute to the knowledge of marsh management.
To complement the debate portion of this program, I wanted to include an expert voice, like Carl's, that supported the human interaction and human management styles of the wildlife area of Cheyenne Bottoms. I also searched for someone to provide a counter-narrative. What would have happened if we had left Cheyenne Bottoms alone and did not heavily manage the landscape? These were the responses I received. Rob Pinner, Avian Conservation Manager with the Nature Conservancy. In fact, I can't even say that we are keeping habitat more natural. The entire system has been impacted by humans, township roads, energy development, farming, draining, you name it. Given that the entire landscape surrounding the bottoms is no longer natural, we can't really do less management. Siltation and invasive plants are a constant battle. So although we do less management when compared to the Kansas Department of Wildlife, Parks, and Tourism, we are still doing lots of management in order to keep it a productive ecosystem. Sil Pimbleton, a member of the Save the Bottoms campaign in the 1980s, responded, "I think it is a mistake to limit human interactions with wetlands. The kind of experiences the Wetland Center provides are vital. Kids need to get their feet wet and discover not only the birds, mammals, amphibians, and reptiles that depend on the wetlands, but also the other creatures that share this wetland. Those creatures that can inhale between their legs, can breathe through their butts, those that carry their scuba tank of air underwater or use a snorkel. How amazing is that? For people to know and appreciate and love wetlands, they need these interactions with natural systems. The dikes and roads across the bottoms are in no way natural, but they do allow people to have a more intimate access to the wetlands and thus increase human connection to that valuable wetland. The sense of connection to the place was what made it possible to mount a campaign to save the bottoms." Jackie Augustine with Audubon in Kansas. Even the most natural landscapes have to be managed. It is just the nature of the world we live in. Even the most pristine national parks are heavily managed to control erosion, insect infestation, bison, deer, wolf numbers, and human disturbance. The fact is that if Cheyenne Bottoms were to be unmanaged, the habitat quality would decline. The pools would fill with sediment. Invasive plants would take over and form monocultures. We have altered water flow so much that we rarely have the flooding events that would reset habitat, and we might not have enough water to create a wetland habitat at all if it wasn't stored in the pools. And I'll leave you this clip from Christina Hayes, Great Bend Convention and Visitors Bureau Director, on how Cheyenne Bottoms provides an economic difference to the area.
Hello all. Hey, so Cheyenne Bottoms annually gets around 90,000 visitors a year. That's incredible. That could be anybody from someone to drive through, hunters, birders, or people who just love nature and photography. So we have in the tourism world a little tool called the Event Impact Calculator. And when you put in those numbers each year, we have a really good outcome of how we are economically supported by Cheyenne Bottoms. If we're looking at the numbers, we've got some great numbers locally. Local taxes from Cheyenne Bottoms alone can bring in $4.6 million. Of course, jobs are also impacted by this. And this is direct jobs, meaning people who work at gas stations, people who fuel the gas stations, people who work at restaurants, the restaurants owners, the people who work at hotels, the people who work in tourism, and the people who overall work in any of the areas that visitors from Cheyenne Bottoms might spend money. Great Bend is the hub for, of course, gas stations, retail where you can shop, restaurants, and of course lodging. And that's where it really makes a big impact on the tourism industry, because we really look forward to having people not only spend money in our community, but stay in our hotels. According to the calculator, as I said before, lodging is very important. We can bring in almost $3.6 million in lodging alone. Next would be food and beverage. $2.1 million could be spent in Great Bend alone on food and beverage. The next highest would be retail. That includes shopping. It could be anywhere from the local boutiques downtown or big shopping centers like Walmart or Orscheln's. So of course, transportation, and that includes fuel and other ways of getting there. That could be $638,000. And another big component is recreation. Like while they're here, we would hope that they would go do something fun, attend a movie, go to the bowling alley, or do anything that might be entertaining on the other side of things. For Cheyenne Bottoms, this can also include hunting and bird watching. I do have to say, when I attend trade shows, the two things Great Bend is known for is the historic SRCA drag strip and Cheyenne Bottoms. Not only does Great Bend love it because of the economic impact that we get from Cheyenne Bottoms, but I also have to say, being in the middle of a wetland in the Central Flyway is incredible. We're so proud of not only what Cheyenne Bottoms brings to us, but what the staff at Kansas Wetlands Education Center does, and how we really embrace the wetlands in our community. Hopefully you see the impact too.